Hi, and welcome to the Love Learns podcast. My name is Dion Zara, just your average girl wishing to learn more about love and relationships. As a young girl, I always dreamt about my wedding day, and to be fair, I still do sometimes. With many couples around me, I quickly came to realize love isn't as straightforward as the movies make out. So I thought I would have conversations with couples who made it past happily ever after to learn more about love. And when I say love, I don't mean like the movies and fairy tales, but I mean LOVE, learning to be open, vulnerable, and empathetic. So if you're ready to learn, unlearn, and discover love through couples, you're in the right place. Okay. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Love Learns. This week we are back again with Yar, and this week we're going to be talking about guilt. If you haven't listened to Yar's podcast already, please head over to
the Meant for More Mindset podcast. So head over to there, and we're going to put the links in the description.
Yes, we are.
Perfect.
Where we've just spoken about guilt and how that shows up in our self-development, who we are as people, how it shows up. And now we're over here talking about how it shows up in relationships. So, Yar, how has guilt showed up in your relationships for you?
So like we were talking about earlier on the other podcast, how it's shown up for me is definitely wanting. So it almost goes back to what we discussed in the previous episode, is this idea of wanting to be liked. So you feel guilty when you get this whole idea of people's projected expectation of you, and so you then take that on board yourself. I did take it on board. I internalized it, and then I would feel guilty if I didn't live up to this standard of myself that was oftentimes unachievable. So maybe in short spurts it was achievable, but not for long periods of time. But then I would feel guilty about it. And the reason why I'd feel guilty about it was because I wanted to be good enough. And I didn't feel like I was. And I felt like I was letting people down. But then it showed up in resentment as well, because I then began to resent myself, and also resent others, because there was this expectation which was unrealistic for me. And so what I had to learn to do in all of my relationships was actually communicate what I wanted, as well as not just allow myself to be communicated to, because it's about learning to give and receive. And I think when you're for me anyway, when I was feeling guilty, it was because I felt like I was the one doing all the giving and not receiving. But also part of that is not just being able to ask to receive, but also being receptive to receiving as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people tend to find guilt when there's a standard that's been broken. And I think a lot of the time it's not just in romantic relationships where it's like maybe infidelity, where you know there's going to be guilt, but sometimes even in friendships you feel like, oh, I should have gone to this person's birthday, but because I wasn't feeling well, I feel guilty that they've been to all my things but I haven't been to theirs. Little things like that start to creep in, and I think sometimes we start to feel a certain way about it, and sometimes it can even build contentment between two people. Because, like, for example, if I'm that friend who has been to so many things for someone and they haven't been to one of my things, I start to feel like I am better than they are. And then it's like, oh, okay, there's this thing that we haven't really communicated, but because you haven't expressed how you feel about something, there's a bit of tension and a bit of like battle between you, unspoken battle that's happening between you. But I think when we start to understand that guilt is, okay, we didn't meet the mark this time, we can start to speak about it in ways that we can accept that, okay, I didn't meet it this time and I'm sorry I didn't meet it this time, but how can I make it up to you? Or you start to create things to kind of soften that contention, contentment between the two of you.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we get too stuck in it that it starts to diminish the relationship on a whole. And how do you think people could accept that they've done something wrong, or that they're not in the right or something, or in the situation where they haven't met the mark?
I think, and this is a concept I only learned in probably the last year, was to let go of blame. In order to really allow relationships to flourish. And let me just say that I'm still learning in this, and
aren't we all?
the idea of it as a concept and the reality of it, there is, they haven't quite aligned for me just yet in life. But this letting go of the whole idea of blame allows you to has allowed me to step into a space of, it's not, and this is what I had to realize, that everybody has an agenda. Like, even in friendships, everybody has an agenda. In relationships, everybody has an agenda. So for example, your partner may be wanting to get a little bit, take it to the next level, and you're not really there yet. So, and that's okay. Nobody's to blame for that. Nobody's wrong for that, and nobody's right for that. But it was recognizing that people aren't against you, they're just for themselves. And because they're for themselves, in relationships, you've got to learn how then to communicate with others in a way that everybody's needs are being met. So you've got to learn to be able to work out, okay, how can we create win-win situations for both of us in this? And how can we let go of our egos long enough to be like, okay, how can I help you to get what you want? And then recognizing that makes you more open and more receptive to helping me get what I want. And I think a lot of relationships, I hate to say this, but I think a lot of relationships are transactional. And because they're transactional, it's kind of like, what can I get out of it? What's in it for me? And because you're not looking at it like it's for the other person, whether or not they're aware of it, starts sensing that. And because they start sensing that, they act accordingly. And because they act accordingly, it now means that you're starting to feel that too. And so then there becomes that rub of, I'm not happy with it. I don't like the way we're communicating, but I don't know why. And so I think what's really important is to really just take the blame out of it and say, okay, how can I show up as a better friend? How can I show up as a better partner? How can I show up as a better lover? How can I show up as a better brother, sister, daughter, mother, whatever it is? And the way you do that really and truly is by asking the other person, but also understanding that the way that it is communicated, that person may, if you just ask them straight out, a lot of times people don't know. So it's kind of like them picking up on clues. Well, they like it when I do this, so because they like it when I do this, I'm going to do a little bit more of that. And really kind of understanding that it's an energy exchange. So because there's an energy exchange, you let go of this whole idea of, because so and so gave me this, I'm going to give them that back, or because I gave them that, my expectation is that they should give me this. It becomes a thing of, I like the way I'm exchanging energy with people. I like the way I'm interacting with people. So therefore, I want to do more of it. And because I want to do more of it, I'm attracting the kind of energy and the kind of love and the kind of kindness, joy, peace that I want in my life. And it really is having those great relationships, I believe, start with you and the relationship you have with yourself, and the conversations that you're having with yourself, so that you can be in the best place, not just for yourself, but also for others. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's a perfectly answer, actually. But now it's given me the thought of the other way around, of the person who is guilty and how that shows up in relationships. So I know that can bring maybe some defensiveness. So how do you think you can deal with someone being defensive towards you?
I think is like it's like what I said, and this is why I like the whole idea of letting go of blame. Is
Yeah.
that you don't go into it with this whole idea of this person is to blame. You go into it with the idea of what why am I in a relationship with this person in the first place? And it's because I love them, more than likely, unless it's like a work colleague or something like that. But it's because I have a good relationship with them, and that's why I'm currently in a relationship with them. So you've got to look past the whole idea of them being guilty or you wanting them to blame them for something, and look to how you can get to a good resolve that works for both of you. And it's about having conversation, and also understanding that conversation just may not be one conversation, maybe months and months and months of conversation.
Yeah.
And that creates an uneasy space sometimes for people, because it can oftentimes be uncomfortable conversation. But in having the uncomfortable conversation, it allows you to understand, okay, that's where that person was coming from when they did what they did, and this is where I was coming from. So it allows you to kind of reach that happy medium, but also understanding that you're constantly, when you're in a relationship with somebody, you're constantly communicating with them. So it's a good idea to check in and just be like, is that okay for you? Or are you okay? And because a lot of people don't do that, they lead with this whole idea of, I know what's best for this person, or I know what's best in this situation. That's where I think there's a breakdown in communication, and that's what causes situations where people end up in places they don't really want to be. And I don't want to go back to using that word guilty, because then it kind of you're pointing the finger, and there's a quote, isn't there, where you're pointing a finger at somebody else, there's three fingers pointing back at you. So everybody has to take some level of accountability, I think, in the situation, especially if you want to get to a point where you want to have a good outcome in it.
100%. And I think with the whole guilt conversations, I think if we took guilt out of it, it's more, okay, how have you fallen short, and how would I have expected you to behave? And trying to understand, okay, if this happened again, how do we learn from it? How do we build from here? And it's just having the understanding of no one's wrong, no one's right. It's just, how do we make it better for us? How do we live together in this situation? And I think that's what a lot of people don't want to admit, that they are also part of that, because that you had to have had some expectation for there to be a sense of guilt. Sometimes those expectations are communicated, and sometimes they're not. And if they're not communicated, maybe this is the opportunity for you guys to communicate these things and have an open communication about where you stand now. But I think by learning these things together, you start to learn each other a lot more, and you start to be a little bit more curious about other things. So, okay, we failed in this part. I'd say fail, but it's not really a fail. We've learned in this part. So how do we learn in other parts? What would we do in this situation? What would we do in this situation?
Yeah.
And just become more curious about how you guys want to live your life together, instead of having blame in the conversation. I think the blame and the guilt are just going to continue pushing you guys apart rather than bringing you in closer. So the more we focus on removing that guilt and getting closer together and seeing the problem as a problem away from us rather than between us, it becomes more of a, okay, let's do this together. It becomes teamwork. And I think when we start to see us as a team rather than as individuals, it starts to minimize the problem a little bit more, because there's two brains thinking about this problem, not just one brain and another brain. Because if we're doing it together, we're picking it apart, we're learning how to get the best result for both of us, and compromise in this situation to know, actually, we're in a good place by speaking about this. We know that these are where our limits are, these are where our boundaries are, these are how we're going to deal with this going forward. And it just removes so much pressure from the situation, and becomes more and more of a developing of the relationship rather than a stagnant relationship just stuck in blame and guilt. So when we remove those things, it becomes more of a, okay, there's a progression, there's movement here. So stay away from the blame game, guys. Stay away from the contentment and the defensiveness. I think the more you accept, okay, I've done something wrong, but how do we go forward? You are opening up conversations for growth. You're opening up conversations for a better future together, because you are having those conversations. Yes, those conversations will be hard and tough, but the fact that you are doing it means that there's something sweeter at the end of it, because you've already established that you guys are on the same page. And there are some things that are going to end with, okay, this is it, that's the end of the relationship. But at least you've tried through it and you've understood that you have put some things in place and it just isn't working, and you can go your separate ways. But you have at least put the work in to know that you're not regretful for not exploring other options, rather than being stuck in just the guilt and the blame of things.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think in terms of getting unstuck in that, it's really allowing for the evolution of the friendship to happen as well. So sometimes the evolution of a friendship means it's the end of the friendship, but also the evolution of friendship means that sometimes you're just not as close to people as you used to be. And there's loads of friends that I have that I'm still friendly with and I still care about, but I'm just not as close as I used to be with anymore. And that's okay. And it's learning to still love them anyway. It's not having the expectation of we once had this type of friendship, so we should maintain that level of friendship. It's actually learning that we are where we are now. We enjoy each other's company when we are together, but when we're not together, we're not seeking each other out in the same way. We're not spending as much time with each other as well, because like I said, life happens, and with that evolution, we take on more responsibilities, or things just change in a way where our time needs to be directed in a different direction. So I think it's really, really important to understand that letting go of guilt, I think ultimately is letting go of your expectation of things and how you think things should be, and just allowing them to be.
Yeah, and allowing things to be allows for more growth. It's like it allows for more exploring, more curiosity, and those things are only going to build your relationships with people, because you're exploring different things with them and you're learning new things and being adventurous, and having a sense of playfulness around it also helps. So guys, guilt does not need to be the end of the world, but it can be the catalyst for change, the catalyst for growth. So if you do need help, like learning more about how to handle guilt with people, please reach out and just book an appointment, and we can like have conversations and stuff. But yeah, all the details are going to be in the show notes, and I'm so looking forward to talking to y'all about more topics and things that really show up in day-to-day lives in relationships, and how we can kind of tackle them as we go along in relationships. And if you head over to yours, you'll hear the beginning of this conversation where we spoke more about guilt and how it shows up in your relationship with yourself. And we can deep dive a little bit more in other topics coming up soon, guys. So we look forward to seeing you in the next episode, and chat to you soon. Take care, guys. Bye.